If I had known 5 or 10 years ago what a difference putting those songs on the screen was going to make, we'd have done it a long time ago. I don't know whether you sense it or not, but for those of us who sit in the front of the building, it is definitely a difference. And I appreciate that. It's amazing how your brain works. When you think the person next to you singing softer than you, you go softer than them because you don't want to be heard in your mind. And so everybody gets a little softer, the next guy gets a little softer, and then the next thing you know, but when you got your heads up and everybody's singing out, it's amazing when we just sing praise to God. And so I appreciate that. The only downside, by the way, of that system is Isaac's holding a secondary remote. If you're wondering how those songs are transitioning, he's doing it. He's actually hitting a remote. Why I say that's concerning is now, if you think I'm going a little slow, just pass him a note, and he can just send my sermon right into hyperspeed, and we'll be done a lot quicker. I want to actually take you, this psalm is parallel to what I want to talk about, the Psalm 71 that Hunter just read to us. I want to take you back to Psalm 107. And he just did that, by the way. Troublemaker. I shouldn't even give him that idea. Let's look at Psalm 107 together here for a minute. We've been reading through the Psalms for a long time. When you're dealing with a psalm or maybe a portion of a psalm once a week, it takes a while to get through them all. And you've noticed maybe the last few weeks that I've left even some of the longer psalms intact. The reason for that is, and when Billy took over the bulletin, he and I were talking about this schedule. I put it together. Believe it or not, it will take us the rest of the year to finish them at one a week. So we'll be the rest of the year trying to get through them, and not that we're trying to get through them, that's a poor choice of words, but as we work through them, even when we're going to read some of the longer ones, now when we get to Psalm 119, we might break that up a little bit, the reason behind doing that was so to allow us to kind of get through them maybe a little in a more expeditious way. And once in a while, I like to come back to them, the Psalms that we've been reading, and actually just talk about them for a little bit. Not just read them on a Sunday morning, but actually break them down a little bit. So go over to Psalm 107 and just stay there. We're going to be there the whole day. And, well, not the whole day, but forever long we're here. And talk about the thoughts that the psalmist writes. And what's interesting to me, by the way, when we think about these longer psalms, in some ways we think, wow, that's a lot of reading, and I'm sure the announcers sometimes wonder, wow, Brian, I wish you'd broken that up a little bit. But what's interesting is, think about, you heard it read to you this morning, they would sing them. Psalms were meant to be sung. Psalms were meant to invoke emotion and thought, and they're poetic, and their intent and purpose in the manner in which they were communicated was through psalms. David might pen the words, and then he'd send it over to the chief musician and say, hey, here's the thoughts I want to express. You put it to music. You do something with it that will allow us then to sing this in praise and honor to God. And all of the psalms were intended that way. But what I want us to appreciate out of Psalm 107 this morning is the initial statement that he makes at the beginning of the text when he says, oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. For his mercy endures forever. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, when he has redeemed from the hand of the enemy. When Jesus has broken us from the bondage of the enemy of sin, we should be praising him. They were praising the name of Jehovah for the deliverance that was brought to them through the hands of the enemies and the challenges and difficulties that they had been experiencing, and they thought that was praiseworthy. They thought it was worthy for them to take the time and energy to shout out their praises and sing their praises before the throne of God for the freedom and deliverance from their enemies that they had experienced. And for us, that imagery is about the freedom from the bondage of sin. We need to be getting up every day praising the name of Jehovah that he has set us free from the consequence and bondage and challenges that sin and evil have brought into our lives. That he is, through Jesus and his shed blood and his ability to bring forgiveness to us, that he has allowed for us to experience what true freedom really means. And our freedoms, friends, isn't found in a constitution. Those are legal rights and things that we gain benefit from, and certainly it's worthy for us to be thankful and pray about those freedoms that we have and experience in our country. But the greatest freedom known to man is not about civil government. The greatest freedom known to man is the freedom from the bondage of sin that comes through the hands of Jesus Christ and the gift of His sacrifice. And it's worthy for us to sing praises. Psalm 71 illustrated that as well. It is worthy for us to take the time and energy and effort to sing, I've been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Because the truth of the matter is, our reality without God is the exact opposite. Our reality without God relieves us remaining in bondage and enslaved to sin and the challenges and difficulties that it presents. Without God, we're left in the hands of the enemy. And so let's look at Psalm 107 and see how he describes that. Notice, if you would, without God, what happens? Verse 4. They wandered in the wilderness in a desolate way. They found no city to dwell in. Hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted in them. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and He delivered them out of their distresses. And He led them forth by the right way, that they might go to a city for a dwelling place. Oh, that men would give thanks to the Lord for His goodness. They, for a period of time, found no place of rest, had no home to lay their head, had no food to eat. They were desolate. But God found a way to bring them into a place of refuge, a city where they could find provision. He led them forth, notice in verse 7, He led them forth by the right way. Without God, there is no right way. Without God, there is no right answer. There's no great benefit. Without Him, we need to find refuge. With Him, we have refuge and safety and comfort. They were lost without Him, without direction. But finally, as they begin to appreciate what God has done, and when He does that, notice He said it again, that they may go to a city for a dwelling place in verse 8. Oh, that men would give thanks to the Lord for His goodness. He's made provision. And for His wonderful works to the children of men. For He satisfies the longing soul and fills the hungry soul with goodness. I don't care what we think. We are empty without God. We may convince ourselves otherwise. We may convince ourselves that I'm completely satisfied when the reality is I'm far from it. Without God, I lack direction. Without God, I don't know which city to go to. Where is the place of refuge? Where will I find the comforts and needs that I might have in my life? Without God, I'm left empty. And that's the reality I'll find myself in. Without God, I have no liberty, no real freedom. Though government may provide me certain rights and liberties and privileges. But without God, there is no real freedom, because without God, I'm in bondage to the enemy of sin. Without God, I am restricted and limited because of those things. Notice verse 10. Those who sat in darkness and in the shadow of death, bound in affliction and irons, because they rebelled against the words of God and despised the counsel of the Most High. And I apologize for stopping too soon sometimes in these texts, but I want you to think about that. Because they despised the testimony and words of God, because they set it aside, it placed them in bondage. Because they chose to ignore the instructions that God had provided for them and the guidance of His wisdom and counsel, because they despised and rejected it, now they're left in bondage. There's no real freedom. Verse 12, therefore He brought down their heart with labor. They fell down and there was none to help. Sometimes we use the phrase they hit rock bottom, and sometimes we talk about somebody maybe needing to hit rock bottom so that they'll maybe hopefully wake up to the realities of their circumstance. I think that's kind of what the psalmist is hinting at here, that God allowed for them to experience the consequences of what it means to despise His Word, and He did that so they would maybe, hopefully, recognize the bondage they'd placed themselves in because of it. I think from this I can conclude that God will let you hit rock bottom if that's what it's going to take to get you and I to realize that I need the Creator. If it takes hitting the hard rock bottom of life in order for me to finally, the light bulb go off and realize that I've placed myself, enslaved myself to the sins and evils of this world, God will let that happen. Because hopefully then we'll realize what we've created and where we've fallen down and there was none to help. Then they cried, verse 13, out to the Lord in their trouble, and He saved them out of their distresses. He brought them out of darkness and the shadow of death and broke their chains in pieces. Oh, that men would give thanks to the Lord for His goodness. There's that phrase again. You almost see that, by the way, and even the way sometimes our hymn writers write the psalms and hymns that we sing. We call it a chorus. And so you sing a verse and then you sing the chorus and then you sing a verse and you sing a chorus. And that's kind of within this psalm, kind of the chorus He keeps coming back to. Oh, that they would give thanks to God for His goodness. You can almost put your mind in thought as they would be singing these things and singing about how they had placed themselves in bondage and challenge and difficulty. God has now set them free and benefited them. They found a place of refuge. Oh, thank God for His goodness. And you can almost hear them singing. Without God, there is no freedom. For He has broken the gates of bronze and cut the bars of iron in two. Without God, we're left without good judgment. They're described in verse 17, fools. Because of their transgression and because of their iniquities were afflicted. Their soul abhorred all manner of food, and they drew near to the gates of death. And it's interesting, when you think about it, that happens both physically and spiritually, but they were so disdained, they disdained so much the food that was being offered, they wouldn't even eat, though they're hungry. Any of you have children like that? They walk in, I'm starving. What do you got? And you list 5 things, I don't want that. Well, I thought you were starving. Starving people generally will take one of the top 5, right? Generally, if you're starving to death, you'll take... But he said they would look at food and be hungry, but it wasn't the food they wanted, and so they disregarded it. They'd rather go hungry. Spiritually, folks do the very same thing. That's foolish. That's what the psalmist said. That's not very good judgment to see the spiritual food that God is offering within the testimony of His Word and say, I have no interest in that. Though He's setting it before us in all His wisdom. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and He saved them. Verse 19. Out of their distresses, He sent His word and healed them and delivered them from their destruction. Oh, that men would give thanks to the Lord for His goodness and for His wonderful works to the children of men. Let them sacrifice the sacrifices of thanksgiving and declare His works with rejoicing. Without God, I don't think very well. Without God, I don't make good choices. Without God, I would allow myself to be starved spiritually and despise and reject His testimony. And He warns me of the consequences that can bring. Without God, I don't have any peace or calm. Notice verse 23. Those who go down to the sea in ships, who do business on great waters, they see the works of the Lord and His wonders in the deep. For He commands and raises the stormy wind, which lifts up the waves of the sea. They mount up to heavens. They go down again to the depths. Their soul melts because of trouble. They reel to and fro and stagger like a drunken man and are at their wits' end. You ever get there? That's a phrase we actually still use. I'm at wits' end. Am I alone? We all find ourselves there sometimes, right? We have battled and battled and battled, and we've struggled and we struggle, and we face the challenges and all the things that have come along, and we're done. I'm at wit's end. You think about a sailor here who's on a vessel, and this ship is just going wherever the waves turn it and twist it and flop it around. And there's no peace and there's no calm. And I imagine they get to wit's end a lot. Then they cry out to the Lord in their trouble. You know, in some ways it's sad that they might wait that long. In some ways, maybe it's kind of sad that we wait that long to get that desperate. But the beauty of it is, if we recognize that there's no calm, there's no peace in my life because I've rejected all that's good and wholesome and right in the eyes of God. And I've turned away the calm and peace that He would prescribe for me, and I've chosen the stormy winds instead. But maybe, and hopefully, I'll reach a distressful state. I'll get to wit's end, and I'll cry unto the Lord to calm the storms of life. Which He does in verse 29. So that its waves are still. Then they are glad because they are quiet. So He guides them to their desired heaven. Oh, that men would give thanks to the Lord for His goodness and for His wonderful works to the children of men. Without God, there is no calm and peace. Without God, I am left to be on that vessel of life, just being tossed and thrown around wherever the wind happens to blow. With God, I have anchor and safety and refuge and comfort, even when the storms get a little rough and when the wind begins to howl. When you're woke up at 5 in the morning with kaboom. Any of you this morning? And you recognize that there's a God of heaven who can control and calm even the darkest and most challenging storms that life ever has to offer. Without Him, there is no peace and calm. With Him, we find resolve. So let's break the bondage. Let's recognize the reality that with God, there is the ability to break the bondage that has come to me, that life has put me in, and the enemy has prescribed for me. Let's go back to the initial part of this narrative in Psalm 107 and remind ourselves of what the conversation was about. Give thanks to God. Praise His name. For He has delivered us from the hand of the enemy. Let the redeemed, let those who have been set free. Redemption, by the way, comes from a word that generally related to slave ownership. It was the idea of somebody taking their money, purchasing a slave with the full intent of then releasing that slave and setting them free. That was what redemption was about. That's why the word is used when He talks about Jesus redeeming us from our sins. He purchases us with His blood with the intent of setting us free from the bondage of sin. And the psalmist here in Psalm 107 is trying to get us to realize that we can break those chains of bondage. We can break those things that are binding us and robbing us of the benefits that God desires for us to have. I can know security. Go back in the text now for a moment. I can know the security and safety that comes from the hands of God. Verse 7, and He led them forth by the right way, that they might go to a city for a dwelling place. The reality is, there's right and wrong in this life. The world would have us believe that there really isn't right and wrong. And even if there is right and wrong, it is only subject to what you think about it. The world wants you and I to believe that there's no real standard of truth, there's no real standard of right and wrong. The only person that gets to decide what's right or wrong for you is you. And friends, that has led many a soul into dark paths. There is a right way, he said. You chose your own way for a while, the psalmist said. And look at the consequences it brought. Finally, when you were wandering around and you couldn't find a city of refuge, you couldn't find anything to eat, you're hungry and you're thirsty, finally you recognized that God was giving you a right way, a right path that was leading you directly to a city of refuge if you would just follow. Have you ever been around somebody that would rather be lost for 10 hours than ask for help? Don't look at me that way, Deborah. Right. Not fair. Yeah. Isn't that silly? God says, I've been here all the while, and I can tell you exactly where you need to go and the exact path you need to take, and it would take you directly to a city of refuge where you need to find safety and help and comfort if you just ask me. But you were choosing to wander around, you couldn't find it, you could find no safety, and you found no place. All the while you were in bondage and didn't even recognize it. Safety and security is found with God. He says, I've got a right way that'll lead you exactly where you need to be. And you can break the bondage of the things that are troubling you and challenging you. You can experience freedom. He brought them out of darkness in verse 14 and the shadow of death and broke their chains in pieces. You ever think about that statement? What I love about what the psalmist does for us there is notice he said he breaks their chains in pieces. You know what happens when the chain gets broken in pieces? It can't what? It can't go back on. That's the power that God has for the challenges and struggles and difficulties in our life. He doesn't take the chain away and then hook it on you just in case you want to bind yourself to it again. He doesn't take the chain away and then leave it accessible so that you... God has the power to break the chains. Our problem is we don't want God to break the chain. We want Him to unlock it for a little while and see whether I like it or not. And if I don't like it real well, then I'll just put the chain back on and I'll go back to that way. And that's not the way it works. What God wants you to do is allow Him to break the chain in pieces, so that you can experience genuine freedom. So long as that chain exists, and so long as you're connected to it, and so long as you allow access to the chain, then you can be bound right back up in it. Let God break it in pieces for you. Let God take whatever is challenging and putting you in the shadow of death. Whatever it is that you're allowing in your life that's binding you and putting you in bondage. Experience real freedom by breaking in pieces the chains with no intent or thought to ever being bound again by them. That's the beauty. I can just hear them singing that. The beauty of freedom in God. And then watch the stability return. Verse 20. He sent His word and healed them and delivered them from their destructions. Have you ever had a now what moment? You know what I love about this psalm in particular, and even the thoughts that it expresses, is this. God says, okay, let me set you free in ways that you've never experienced before. Let me break in pieces the chains, the things that have been putting you in bondage. Let me do that for you. And the result will be a freedom that then allows you to come and experience the stability that God offers. God doesn't say, I want to break the pieces and then see what you do. He says, I'm going to break the chains in pieces and then share with you the best way to experience life after that. He'll send His word to bring healing. I love that about the Creator because He recognizes that people who have been in bondage to something for a long period of time are not immediately going to heal just because the chains were broken away. I'm not immediately going to be better just because I've been set free. I'm going to need advice, counsel, instruction, wisdom. When I say, now what? Thank you, but now what? And that's where the wisdom and counsel and knowledge of God starts to kick in. And we honor that freedom from bondage, and we honor the benefit of the new stability that I'm experiencing by seeking the wisdom and guidance from our Creator. I was once bound by sin, but now I have stability and refuge. Look at verse 30. Then they are glad because they are quiet. So He guides them to their desired haven. Don't you sometimes just like to sit in a rocking chair and do nothing? Experience quiet. I was talking to a fellow the other day, and he was telling me a place that there's no cell phone coverage. And I was like, sign me up. I'm heading there. Sometimes we just quiet, and that's what God can provide in ways that we can't experience otherwise. The lives that we live sometimes are pretty chaotic, and they can be pretty troublesome, and they can be very heartbreaking. And at times I probably wonder, can stability even come? Is there a city of refuge for Brian somewhere? Is there a place? And the answer is yes. God has refuge in mind for you. God has peace in mind for you. God can offer you a quiet, still, and calm that can't be experienced anywhere else if you'll turn to Him. The beauty of what we have with God is so far superior to what happens without Him. And so this morning I ask you, are you prepared? Are you ready to turn to Him and seek the benefits that He offers? Are we ready to experience the peace and calm and refuge? Well, I admit that while without God I was enslaved and in bondage by so many things, by the sins and flesh and the things of this world and now I experience through Jesus the ability to break those chains in pieces and leave them behind and give myself over to the guidance and counsel and wisdom of Jehovah, who knows me better than anyone knows me. And I'm going to make ready to meet my Creator, knowing the freedom and the calm and the benefits that He provides. If we could help you this morning, encourage you to experience the place of refuge that is God. Pray for you that you might break those chains in pieces through the aid of our Creator and to experience the stability that He offers. If we could encourage you in any way, won't you come while we stand and while we